The moment you explain yourself, you surrender authority. That statement violates everything you were taught. It is still true. You were trained to believe that clarification signals maturity, that truth earns respect, that if you speak calmly enough, fairly enough, the record will correct itself. None of that survives contact with real power. Explanation does not elevate you. It positions you, and the position is always lower. You have seen this play out. A meeting where a single comment questions your competence. A long marriage where one sentence is twisted and held against you. A family gathering where a quiet accusation hangs in the air. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just enough pressure to force you to respond. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens. Your pulse accelerates. Adrenaline rises. Cortisol follows. Every instinct pushes you to justify, to clarify, to be understood. That instinct is not wisdom. It is conditioning. The moral story says truth restores balance. Reality says status defines outcomes. The one who explains accepts the role of the accused. The one who defends acknowledges a judge. Power never belongs to the person scrambling to be understood. Power belongs to the one who sets the frame and stays silent inside it. You were not losing arguments. You were playing the wrong game. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this centuries ago, not as theory, as observation. He watched courts, alliances, betrayals, and reputations rise and collapse. His conclusions were never moral. They were accurate. Modern society buried them because obedient people are easier to manage when they believe fairness is automatic. If you continue defending yourself, the cost is permanent. Eroded authority, chronic resentment, invisible loss of status you cannot explain but always feel. You become predictable, manageable, a piece on someone else's board. This is not a communication trick. This is a power framework, and it extracts a price from anyone who ignores it. What follows is not comfort. It is clarity. You are about to see why this reflex exists, why your biology reinforces it, and how silence used correctly reverses the entire structure. The door is open. Verbal self-defense is a conditioned childhood reflex, not a sign of maturity or intelligence. You were not born explaining yourself. You were trained to do it. Verbal self-defense feels adult because it wears the costume of reason, calm words, logic, evidence. But beneath that surface, it is not intelligence speaking, it is fear, a reflex burned into your nervous system long before you had power of your own. The pattern begins in childhood. Authority accuses. You explain to survive. A parent, a teacher, a figure who controls punishment and approval. When something goes wrong, silence is interpreted as guilt. The only escape is explanation. It wasn't me. That's not what I meant. Here's what really happened. Over time, your brain learns a brutal equation. My safety depends on convincing the judge that I am good. That lesson never leaves. It just changes uniforms. As an adult, the authority figure dissolves, but the reflex remains. Your boss, your partner, a colleague, a stranger, online. Anyone who questions you is unconsciously promoted to judge. You don't decide this, your body does. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, cortisol spikes, the mouth opens before the mind catches up. You call this communication. It is submission. Maturity is supposed to mean emotional regulation. Intelligence is supposed to mean clarity of thought. Yet the compulsion to explain is neither. It is the residue of a hierarchy you no longer live in, replayed inside a nervous system that never updated the software. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The need to be understood is not wisdom. It is dependency. A self-contained adult does not require external validation to maintain internal stability, but the conditioned child does. The child explains because explanation once prevented pain. The child believes silence equals danger, so the child keeps talking even when the context has changed. And this is where power dynamics quietly punish you. In adult social structures, explanation does not signal innocence. It signals vulnerability. It announces that your sense of worth is negotiable, that your identity depends on their agreement. You may be speaking facts, but what they hear is fear. And fear always lowers status. The most revealing detail is this: truly secure people rarely explain themselves. Not because they are arrogant, because they are complete. They do not experience accusations as threats to their existence. Without threat, there is no reflex. You were taught the opposite. You were taught that being misunderstood is intolerable. That clarity guarantees fairness. That truth automatically earns respect. None of that governs real human behavior. What governs behavior is hierarchy, perception, and control of the frame. And the moment you begin defending, you confirm the frame was never yours. This is why verbal self-defense persists well into old age. Not because people are immature, but because the conditioning was never challenged. It was mistaken for virtue, packaged as being reasonable, rewarded as being the bigger person. In reality, it is a relic, a childhood survival mechanism misfiring in adult power games. Until you see it as such, you will keep explaining. And every explanation will quietly cost you authority. Every time you explain, you place yourself on trial and hand someone else the gavel. There is no such thing as a neutral explanation. The moment you begin to justify yourself, a courtroom is created. One side asks, one side answers, and the one answering is already losing. When you explain, you are not exchanging information. You are accepting a role. The role is not equal. It is subordinate. You become the defendant. The other person becomes the judge, whether they earned that position or not. This is the part most people never see. You assume explanation is cooperative, civil, mature. You believe it restores balance. In reality, it establishes hierarchy. The one who explains acknowledges that their actions require approval, that their intent must be evaluated, that their value is up for review. Power does not operate on intentions. It operates on frames. Whoever defines the frame controls the outcome. And the frame of explain yourself is never innocent. It implies wrongdoing. It presumes guilt. It places the burden of proof on you. Once you step inside it, you are playing defense in a game you did not design. Notice how automatic this feels. Someone says, "Why did you do that?" You answer. You do not pause to ask who appointed them to ask. You do not question the premise. Your nervous system responds as if authority is present. This is not logic. This is conditioning. And conditioning is exploitable. Every explanation you give reveals leverage. You expose what you care about, what you fear being judged for, what you cannot tolerate being misunderstood about. These details are not harmless. They are buttons. Once seen, they can be pressed again and again. That is why manipulators provoke explanations, not to understand you, but to map you. They accuse lightly at first, a tone, a look, a vague statement. If you rush to clarify, they learn something valuable. You are movable, reactive, invested in their perception. From that point forward, control becomes easy. All they need to do is imply judgment, and you will supply effort. This is why explanation never ends the conflict. It escalates it. The more you explain, the more material you provide, the more angles they have to challenge, the more energy you burn trying to secure approval that was never promised. You believe you are defending truth. In reality, you are feeding a structure designed to keep you beneath it. High-status individuals understand something most people resist. They do not need to be acquitted. A king does not argue his innocence. A leader does not justify their existence. They act, and reality adjusts. This does not mean silence is passive. It is positional. Refusing to explain is not avoidance. It is a refusal to accept false authority. It says, I do not recognize this court. I do not accept your premise. I do not require your verdict. That refusal is destabilizing. When there is no defendant, the judge loses relevance. Questions lose force. Accusations collapse into opinions, and opinions without authority are just noise. Every time you explain, you give power away. Not because your reasons are wrong, but because the act itself signals surrender. Until you stop stepping into the role of the accused, you will keep handing the gavel to people who never earned it. Most accusations are not seeking truth. They are testing whether you will react and expose weakness. Most accusations are not questions. They are probes. They are not launched to discover what happened. They are released to observe what you will do next. The truth is incidental. The reaction is the objective. This is where most people misread the situation. You assume the other person wants clarity, fairness, resolution. You believe that if you respond accurately and completely, the issue will dissolve. That belief is comforting. It is also wrong. In real social dynamics, accusations function like pressure tests. A comment is thrown out casually, sometimes vague, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes deliberately unfair. The content matters less than the effect. The person is watching for movement, for tension, for urgency, for justification. They are watching to see if you jump. If you react immediately, explaining, correcting, defending, you have answered their real question. You have confirmed that the topic touches something sensitive, that their words penetrated, that there is a seam in your armor. From that moment on, the accusation has done its job. This is why facts rarely resolve these moments. You can provide timelines, receipts, logic, and context, and still feel the ground slipping beneath you. The exchange was never about accuracy. It was about leverage, and leverage is extracted from emotional exposure, not from evidence. People who understand this use accusation strategically. They introduce doubt not to clarify reality, but to destabilize yours. A raised eyebrow, a phrase like, people are saying, a suggestion framed as concern. Each is designed to create just enough uncertainty to provoke a response. Once you begin defending, they gain information. What you rush to deny reveals what you fear being defined by. This is how control is built quietly. The most telling detail is that the accusation often persists even after you explain. Or it shifts, or it returns later in a different form. This confuses people who believe in good faith dialogue. They think, I already addressed this. What they do not realize is that the explanation was never meant to end the exchange. It was meant to open you up. Reaction is the currency. When you react, you give away emotional data. You show where your self-image is fragile. You demonstrate how easily your internal state can be influenced by external judgment. That information is far more valuable than the truth of the matter itself. This is why manipulators repeat accusations that have already been disproven. They are not gathering facts. They are confirming access. And here is the part that unsettles most people. Many accusations are not even consciously malicious. They are instinctive. Humans test boundaries the way animals do. They push lightly. If there is resistance, they retreat. If there is submission, they advance. This happens everywhere. Workplaces, families, long-term relationships, social groups. The person who reacts becomes manageable. The person who does not becomes opaque. When you do not respond the way you are expected to, the dynamic shifts. Silence removes feedback. Neutral presence removes traction. Without reaction, the accusation has nothing to attach to. It floats. It weakens. It often collapses back onto the person who launched it. This is why the most unsettling response to an accusation is not anger or logic. It is composure, lack of urgency, the absence of the very reaction they were testing for. Once you see accusations for what they usually are, not truth-seeking devices, but pressure tests, you stop treating them as emergencies. You stop explaining. You stop volunteering weakness. And in that moment, the power quietly returns to where it should have been all along. Silence and non-reaction shatter the power game and force the attacker to expose their instability. Power games survive on response. They feed on friction. They require resistance to exist. The moment you stop reacting, the structure collapses. Silence is not absence. It is denial of participation. When you refuse to respond to an attack, you remove the fuel that keeps the exchange alive. No defense, no counterattack, no emotional leakage. The other person is left alone with the tension they created, and most people cannot tolerate that. This is where the real shift happens. Human beings are wired to expect feedback during conflict. Anger expects anger. Accusation expects explanation. Provocation expects movement. When nothing comes back, the brain panics. The social script breaks. There is no data to adjust to, no signal to read, no confirmation of control. Silence creates a psychological vacuum, and vacuums pull things inward. The attacker begins to fill the space themselves. They talk more, clarify their accusation, soften it, escalate it, walk it back. Their words start contradicting each other. Their tone shifts. Their composure erodes. What was supposed to be your weakness becomes theirs. This is not accidental. This is exposure. When you do not react, you force the other person to confront their own emotional state. Without your defense to push against, they feel the aggression echoing back at them. It becomes visible, awkward, uncomfortable. The instability that was aimed at you turns inward. That is why silence feels threatening. It denies the attacker the role they were trying to assign you. There is no defendant, no performance, no emotional labor provided on demand. The hierarchy they attempted to impose never solidifies. Without your participation, the game has no board. And games without boards cannot be won. Non-reaction also does something else. It protects your internal position. When you stay silent, you reveal nothing. No values, no insecurities, no pressure points. Silence is opaque. It gives the other person nothing to work with. They cannot adjust their strategy because there is no signal to read. This is why silence is often mistaken for confidence or arrogance by those who rely on reaction to feel powerful. They interpret non-reaction as superiority because, in a power context, it is. The one who does not need to respond controls the pace. The one who waits controls the frame. This is not about being cold. It is about being sovereign. Silence communicates that your internal state is not hostage to external noise, that accusations do not penetrate automatically, that you do not scramble to repair someone else's emotional discomfort. This forces a recalibration. The attacker must either escalate, revealing desperation, or disengage, acknowledging loss of control. Either way, the power dynamic has flipped. Most people never experience this because they interrupt the process too early. They speak to relieve their own discomfort. They break the silence before it does its work. They mistake the urge to respond for necessity. It is not. Silence is pressure without effort. Non-reaction is dominance without aggression. When you stop reacting, you stop being manageable. And when you stop being manageable, the person attempting to control you is left exposed alone with their instability, and suddenly aware that they no longer hold the strings. When you must speak, power comes from pulling force, agreeing, reframing, analyzing behavior, never from defending. There are moments when silence is not an option. A response is required. But the mistake is believing that response must be defensive. Defense is the weakest use of language. It meets force with force, absorbs the attacker's frame, and spends energy trying to neutralize it. In power dynamics, this guarantees loss. The one who defends is already inside a structure designed to diminish them. Power does not push back. Power pulls. Pulling force means you never collide with the accusation. You redirect it. You let it continue moving until it exposes its own imbalance. This is why the strongest verbal positions do not argue against attacks. They reposition them. One method is controlled agreement. Agreeing does not mean submission. It means refusing to provide resistance. When someone accuses you, they expect denial. Denial validates the accusation by treating it as serious. Agreement removes its teeth. It creates cognitive dissonance. The attacker pushes forward and suddenly finds nothing there. You're careless. You're right, sometimes. No explanation, no justification. The insult is stripped of its charge. You acknowledge the surface truth without accepting the identity being imposed. The force passes through you and dissipates. The attacker loses momentum because there is nothing to fight. Another method is reframing the interaction itself. Instead of responding to what is being said, you shift attention to how it is being said. This changes the terrain completely. You are no longer a participant in the accusation, you are an observer of the behavior. That's an interesting way to phrase it. Why does this matter to you so much? What reaction are you hoping for here? These statements do not defend your position, they analyze theirs. In one move, you exit the role of defendant and assume the position of evaluator. The spotlight moves, the power follows. This is deeply unsettling to someone attempting control. They want you focused inward on your flaws, your mistakes, your need to explain. When you analyze their behavior instead, you reverse the polarity. Suddenly, they are the one being examined. A third method is amplification through exaggeration. When an accusation is absurd, treating it seriously is a mistake. Seriousness gives it weight. Instead, you stretch it until it collapses under its own ridiculousness. So you're saying I'm completely irresponsible? Absolutely. A walking disaster. Delivered calmly, without emotion. The exaggeration exposes the attack as theatrical rather than factual. You signal that you are not injured by the claim, and therefore, it has no power over you. The frame becomes yours. What all of these methods share is a refusal to protect the ego. Defense exists to protect identity. Power exists when identity is already secure. The moment you stop guarding how you are perceived, language becomes a tool instead of a shield. Defensive speech leaks information. It reveals what hurts, what matters, what threatens your self-image. Pulling force reveals nothing. It keeps your internal position intact while forcing the other person to adjust. This is conversational Aikido. You do not meet strength head-on, you redirect it. You let the attacker defeat themselves by overextending. When you must speak, never push, never prove, never plead. Pull the force, shift the frame, observe the behavior. Defense keeps you small. Redirection makes you untouchable. Practice, execute. Stop explaining immediately. For the next 5 days, you are forbidden to defend yourself. No clarifying, no correcting, no context. If accused, stay silent. If misunderstood, let it stand. If confronted, respond only with facts or nothing. You will feel pressure in your chest, an itch to fix it, a fear of being seen wrong. Do not move. Stay inside that discomfort until it burns out. Nothing changes because you understand this. Everything changes because you endure it. Those who complete this become unmanageable. Those who break it remain reactive, readable, controlled. Choose. There is a limit to everything said above. I don't reject it. I don't defend it either. I've just seen where it stops working. After enough years watching power dynamics up close, a pattern becomes hard to ignore. Control works, silence works, non-reaction works. But they all extract a quiet cost that rarely shows up on camera. Not moral, not dramatic, just cumulative. People who master these frames often become efficient at winning exchanges and strangely absent from themselves. They stop reacting and slowly stop feeling much of anything in the moment. Not because they are enlightened, but because staying unreadable requires constant internal compression. You don't talk about that part when you're explaining power. I've seen manipulators who understood every rule and still lived in a permanent state of vigilance, always scanning, always measuring, never at rest. They weren't villains, they were alert. And being permanently alert has a texture. It flattens things. This is where I part ways with most power content. I don't admire domination for its own sake. I don't believe knowing the game automatically makes you superior. Many people who know the rules are still trapped inside them. They just lose more slowly. What matters more than control is awareness of when control stops serving you. Power used unconsciously hardens into posture. Posture becomes identity, and identity, once fixed, becomes another cage. Here is the uncomfortable truth that doesn't sell well. If you build your sense of self entirely on being unreactive, unbothered, untouchable, eventually nothing reaches you, including what matters. Not everyone who stops defending themselves becomes free. Some just become distant. The difference is subtle, and it isn't visible from the outside. I don't have a resolution for that tension. I just know it exists, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's where I'll stop. There is a limit to everything said before this. I don't reject it. I don't defend it. I've just watched where it fails. After enough time observing power up close, certain things stop being theoretical. Control works, silence works, non-reaction works. That part is not debatable. What rarely gets mentioned is the cost, not moral, not visible, just something that accumulates quietly. People who become fluent in these dynamics often get very good at winning exchanges and noticeably absent from themselves. They stop reacting. Then, over time, they stop registering much at all. Not because they've transcended anything, because staying unreadable requires constant internal pressure. Compression becomes a habit. I've known people who understood every rule. They didn't look dangerous. They looked alert, always scanning, always tracking, tone shifts, micro moves, leverage, never settled, never fully off duty. That state has a texture. It narrows things. It dulls edges. You don't see it from the outside. This is where my view separates from most power narratives. I don't admire dominance for its own sake. I don't assume that understanding the game places someone above it. Many people who know the rules are still enclosed by them. They're just more efficient inside the enclosure. Control isn't the end point. Awareness of when control stops being useful matters more. Unconscious power hardens into posture. Posture calcifies into identity. And identity, once rigid, becomes another structure you have to defend. Here's the part that doesn't translate well to short clips. If you build yourself entirely around being untouchable, eventually nothing touches you. Not attacks, not meaning either. Not everyone who stops defending themselves becomes free. Some simply become distant. The difference isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. You feel it only after a while. I don't have a clean answer for that tension. I just know it's there. And once you notice it, it stays noticed. That's all.